We're good? All right. Everybody, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank GrrCON for sponsoring us and having us here. Today, what I'm going to talk about a little bit is we're going to step out of a little bit out of the technical side. We've got some really, really smart people here doing some really, really in-depth stuff. So I thought maybe we'll take a little step back, look at industry, look at business, and look at the processes that we've gotten to that have brought us to where we are today, why we're seeing some of the attacks we're seeing today, and maybe some of the ideas that we can put to them to try and back them off. So what we're talking about today is encryption, mobility, and cloud, what I like to call the unholy trinity. I'm not going to bother you with who I am. I am a strategist for the Office of the CISO at Zscaler. We're a cloud-based security platform. That's all the selling you're going to get out of me. What we've got today is a massive shift to as a service. Everybody will call this cloud shifting. Anybody here from marketing? Excellent. I hate the term cloud. It's in a lot of presentations. It's in a lot of marketing today, and it is so ubiquitous. It means nothing anymore. It really doesn't. I don't think it meant anything back in the beginning when they started using it. But to me, it's as a service, something as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service, security as a service, something that somebody does for you. That's what we're talking about. And we're seeing this massive, massive shift. 81% of the companies with more than 1,000 employees are currently using, testing, or working on, or thinking about AWS alone, right? That's not Rackspace, that's not Google, that's not Azure, that's just AWS. That is a huge, huge shift. Gartner has said that this cloud shift will affect $1 trillion in IT spend by 2020. I mean, think about that, $1 trillion in spend. We got enough problems getting our IT budgets approved. This is where the money's going. They're shifting it out of on-prem and into as a service. And we're seeing that nearly half of all new software developments are alternative consumption, right? So that's anything other than your traditional, shows up on a disk and you put it in somewhere. Anybody heard the term shadow IT? I want to bash my head on the wall when I hear shadow IT. I did my first media interview on shadow IT in 2004. That's how long this term has been floating around. They've applied it to everything from the smart guy who knew computers that you hired into the finance department and called him a finance analyst because the IT department didn't support you, all the way through to all the as a services that are going on. Shadow IT is IT. Really what this is an employee that is smart and trying to do better and has a credit card, right? The simplest way, if you want to find out how much of this stuff is going on in your company, easiest, simplest, most cost-effective way to do it, don't buy any software, don't go grabbing anything to scan firewall ports. Go down to your expense management team. Find out who's got recurring expenses at the $19, $24 expense rate, because guess what? You don't have to submit expense receipts for that. That's the typical cutoff, is $25, right? So they'll price these things for $20. They'll lay it under other, and it will just cycle through, right? And that's where you'll find a lot of this. And what's happening is they're putting up massive amounts of company data, personal data, into infrastructure as a service, into storage as a service, and there are no controls over it. And it's not malicious. That is just simply, it's happening because they don't understand what they're doing. If anybody's even looked at the new Sierra upgrade to Mac OS, right? One of the third questions it asks you, we're going to sync all of your documents to iCloud. Yes? Default checked, right? There's 7, 8 gig, 20 gig, what have you got that's going to get pushed up there, and what permissions do you have on it? You don't know. And what, I think it was SkyHigh did the test, they found the average user has just over 2,000 files in public infrastructure. It's because of these syncs that are going on, because they're putting them in places where they need to share them with somebody, or they want to get them home, work on them on the weekend, right? They're not maliciously trying to go around policy, but what they're ending up doing is causing us a nightmare. We have, 20% of those files are containing PII, right? We've got PHI, PCI documents, so we've got credit card numbers in there, we've got social security numbers, we've got a lot of data in there. And 13% fully public. No security at all. You got the link, you got the file, right? Even internally, when you look at nearly 70% of files shared internally with no controls. Not everybody in our company should be looking at every file in our company. We know that, right? This is just good access control. We got to move to mobility. Right? Everybody's moving over to the phones. Everybody's moving to iPads, tablets. They're getting away from laptops. My laptop, 90% of it is doing presentations. That's it. Everything else, you're doing it off a mobile device because you're moving, right? You're always going. We've got a $140 billion industry by 2020. I mean, that is why companies are rebuilding, rebranding, redesigning websites so that they show up on an iPhone 5, on an iPhone 6, on a tablet, on an iPad, and that they auto-adjust and look good, and nowadays they all look the same. There's very little creativity in it, but they're doing it because that's where people are accessing their information. So they're pushing over to it. And we know that when you have money there, when people are putting money into something, the bad stuff's going to follow. We know that 40% of employees in the US use personal devices. Anybody here from the sort of the policy side understand what we have as an issue when somebody uses a personal device for work? Right? You have no legal claim to the device to start with. Your data, their device. What do you do when they quit? Right? What do you do when you want to fire them? What happens if you want to put something on there, you want to wipe it, you want to effect control over your data, but it's a personal device. Now we're starting to bleed into an area that you can't control. We have a full-on 30% of businesses are admitting that they're not even testing their applications, their mobile apps. Anybody here go to DEF CON and see the presentation that JMax did on the August lock? No? Oh, guys, go online, take a look at this one. He owned that thing in like 5 minutes, and it was all through a really shitty app. It was a poorly designed app, right? August, to their credit, they patched it, they've gone back and done a lot of work to fix it, right? But they built the app and put it out because they got to get product out, right? And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing product has to get out. We'll get to security later. It's still the same meaningless commitment that we've seen for the last 20 years in security. We'll get to security later, right? We can't do that anymore. Products take off too quickly, they get embedded too far, and all you have to do is look at the world of IoT, right? There's a lot of stuff out there that has no security in it. We were hidden in encryption. Regardless of your moral compass on Snowden and how he did stuff, he did one hell of a good thing on the encryption side, at least, in that he advanced the use of commercial-grade encryption to the general public by nearly a decade. I think the U.S. government said 7 years. I figure they're not giving him full credit. But we're seeing a massive, massive shift to default encryption. To give you context for where these numbers come from, Zscaler, as I said, is a platform. We have 15 million users active on our platform today. We process about 25 billion transactions every day. So we're doing just over double Google. I think Google's about 12 billion right now a day, because once you're out of the search, and we continue to look at it. And 25% of our customers are blocking unscannable files. If they can't scan it, it's not coming in, right? If they're using passwords to protect files, if anybody's using password protect, if you know anybody, please correct them and fix them. This is a fallacy. It's not protecting anything. It's false security. It makes them think that they feel it's good. They send out the file, send out the password, and then, you've lost control. You have no control over it. If somebody wants to be protecting data, they should be using a service that has an audit trail against it, identity access management applied to it, and that you can control it and understand what's happening with it. 43%, that number's got to be low. I'm figuring it's over 50 by now because we see it increase at about 1.2% every month. And it's getting tough to keep up to the stats on this one. But we're seeing SSL by default. Twitter, Facebook, Netflix. Netflix is SSL by default, right? And business is going as well. 38% of malicious content hidden inside SSL. And over half of the APTs are using SSL as well. They figured it out, right? Enterprise does not look at SSL. There's a couple of reasons why they don't, and we'll talk a little about the privacy aspects, but also the capacity and the cost issue, right? But what is happening is they're hiding inside there because they can get in and out, because if you think back to the shadow IT idea, right? If you've got a credit card and SSL, you can use shadow IT. Well, you don't even need the credit card at this point. You can come in and get the credit card and start using the services. So we've created this unholy trinity, right? Some people call it the Bermuda Triangle, where stuff just disappears. You've got data traversing networks that you have no control over, right? They're on 4G, LTE, they're on public, they're at the coffee shops, hotels, conferences, right? So you've got no visibility into the networks. If you do have visibility into the networks, it's encrypted. So you've got control of the network, but you can't see the data, right? And then on top of that, your data is now sitting on these services that are out there, right? They're sitting out there on machines and systems controlled by other people. So the question then becomes, how do we deal with this? Well, let's take a little look back and let's look at the evolving landscape to start with. when all of this really started, enterprise was very traditional, sedentary. It was static. People went to work at an office, right? They connected to their PC. They used their PC or their dumb terminal, whatever it was, but they were internal. Even when they started to expand, they had VPNs, corporate-owned assets. People didn't buy big honking machines or incredibly powerful laptops and carry them around, right? So it was really a controlled environment. We had location-based services, and I think we did a great job on this when we built really good security services to protect corporate. Today, everything's dynamic. Everything's moving. Everybody is mobile. Anybody in here without a smartphone? All right. Always worth asking. Somebody occasionally pulls out a flip phone. But we've moved into this BYOD. We've moved into this blended lower cost for enterprise. So let employees use their own stuff. The attackers, good old days, it was rogue individuals that were trying to make a name for themselves, right? It was about respect. It was about what they were trying to do and get out there. It was not typically financial. There was money to be made, but it was not the primary. Today, this is organized, this is highly efficient, and this is all about the money. And we know that because we see the swing in the EKs going over to ransomware. It's a massive, massive swing. The attacks were loud and noisy. Back in the days, the big attacks, they came in, you had boundaries around them. You knew when it started, you knew when it ended. It was a nightmare while it went on, but when it was finished, it was done. Today, this stuff is silent, quiet, and you find out 2 years after you've been compromised, right? This is not noisy. This is get in, stay in, and be in. If you think about Sony, I think their only real option is to throw out everything that they ever had. Start fresh. If they even tried to restore or correct systems, how many of those systems can they guarantee still aren't compromised? And back then, we did URL filtering and antivirus, right? It was good. It worked. And today, we do URL filtering and antivirus. We haven't kept up, right? We have not stayed current with the attacks that are happening and with the dynamics that have happened in the landscape. So, from a history perspective, 2014 was the year of the credit card. They were going after credit card numbers. Nowadays, it's buy one, get one free on the darknet, right? They're giving this stuff away. Credit cards are pointless. You guys get credit cards compromised. You get a new one. You don't even know what happened. Thing shows up in the mail the next morning, right? Or you get that phone call saying, did you make that? No, I didn't. And you got a new card on the way. We're seeing a move into PII, into personal information. It is becoming very, very valuable because of the longevity in it. It's very difficult to change your social security number or your social insurance number. It's impossible to change your medical history. I don't think you want to. And then you've got prescriptions and all of the other things that go with it, right? So you're tied to that kind of information. And we saw that with things like OPM. We saw that with Anthem. We know that they were coordinated. Even Anthem was 80 million odd records that were compromised, 4.5 to 5 million federal employees, and 75 million collateral damage, right? But that is what is happening out there. And then we're seeing the extortion and the hacktivism, right? So mentioned Sony. Anybody familiar with Ashley Madison? All right, we got people to put their hand up. Nobody ever puts their hand up for Ashley Madison. For those that aren't from California, these guys are actually back on the air now with new commercials, and they're rebranding. For those that don't know Ashley Madison, right, it was the site where you could have an affair, and they would charge you $19.95 to permanently delete your data. That was the deal. Turned out they weren't doing it. They were deleting your name. That was it. And then you could recreate the ID afterwards. Somebody went in, the team went in and just owned them, dumped everything to the internet. I never quite understood the threat there, which was shut down your company, so either end it all, or we'll completely embarrass all of your customers. It's not like they really suffered. Case in point, they're still in business today, somehow. There's a lot of guts in going back into the market. But this is what we're seeing. We're seeing this move and this shift to more coordinated, more sort of that larger scale attack, if you will. And even if you look at the hacking team, that was Phineas Fisher, right? One guy went in and just owned the entire company. So why PII? As I mentioned, it's got longevity, right? You can run false medical claims. Insurance companies typically will write off anything under 20 grand without asking, without question. It's just the cost of doing business. Cost of doing business, of course, ends up with us at the end, right? Even if you look at like the DDoS attack on Krebs, Google came in and put up the privacy shield for them after their previous vendor wasn't able to handle it. And that's being done gratis, which is great. I think it's phenomenal that they get it. But Google has to eat those costs. Those costs go into cost of good. That is inside the business model, so they will pass that on, intentionally or not. It comes back to the end user that does pay, right? And that's why we can't just sort of forget about these things. Fraudulent tax returns as well. Anybody ever, submitted a tax return and got that, oh no, you already submitted yours? I mean, that is a gut-wrenching feeling when you see that, when somebody else has submitted your tax return for you beforehand. It's gone corporate. The whole ransomware thing is gone completely corporate. We've seen it with Presbyterian Medical, Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital. We've seen it with Calgary University. We've seen it with the police force. And people are paying, right? There's only 3 things, like the FBI said, there's 3 things you can do: walk away, come off backups, or pay, right? Well, I've finally found a customer, not a customer of mine actually, a person, that experienced the cryptoware that is actually running encryption over the life cycle of your backup, right? So these guys are building the keys in to decrypt it on the fly to allow your machine to go through its 30-day backup cycle, and they hit you on day 35. So you go to the backups like the FBI said, you start pulling backups, and they're all encrypted all the way back. We'll motor through this a little bit because we're a little bit short on time. We're also seeing the terrorist side of the thing, right? They need money to fund the campaigns, so there's ransomware to do that. We need information, so we see the attacks like Anthem, we see attacks like OPM, and we've even seen, I don't know if anybody saw it, it was actually buried inside the whole thing with Sony, happened around the same time. A German report came out and said that a German steel mill had been compromised and the cooling systems had been affected. They were unable to shut down the blast furnace, caused quote-unquote unspecified massive damage. We don't know if that attack was meant to do that, if it was like to be a Stuxnet or whether it was simply a byproduct of what happened, but we're seeing physical manifestations of what's happening in the cyber attacks. And this will continue, right? As systems go online, as they bring more and more in, because it's a lower cost, run one set of Ether instead of 2, so we don't have separate systems. It's a lower cost to allow a technician to VPN in instead of driving 4 hours to and from, which he gets to bill for, right? They're going to drive down costs. This is going to continue. And we got trusted partner attacks. The attack on Target came through Fazio, right? It was the HVAC vendor. Same with the attack on OPM. That came through Keypoint, which is a background checking service. Anybody ever applied for a job at the federal government? Everybody going to admit to it? When you fill out that application, it is a very detailed application. And when you fill it out, it is under the understanding that you either disclose, and if they find out afterwards something else, it could preclude you from employment. So people put a lot of information in those things. Everything that they feel is effective, and they ask a lot of questions. They also ask for fingerprints, right? They were in that database when they digitized them. So we've got this entire shift. As I said earlier, I think the security industry did a phenomenal job protecting the data center, right? We built the stacks, we put the right processes in place, and it became too cost prohibitive to attack a data center in general, not total, but in general. So you always have to go after the weakest link, because to date, it's cheaper to attack us than it is to defend us, right? And that's what happens. When we make it more expensive for them to attack, they shift and move somewhere else. It is now easier to simply go after, we're going to pick on Yahoo. It's easier to go after a public website, right? Put up some sort of redirect, some sort of infected code, something just to grab a hold of them so that the employee picks it up. And it's usually not going to happen inside the corporate office. They're going to be when they take their laptop home or come to a conference or traveling. And once they do that, they literally walk this stuff in the back door. We're back to SneakerNet, right? This is physically walking in our back door. We've got the great protection at the perimeter. The perimeter has simply dissolved. So what do? We've got to shift the defense here. We've got to move somewhere else. We've got to look at other ways to take care of this. This is what a traditional data center connection would look like up until probably the last few years. But what we've seen is the internet's the new data center. That massive shift that we talked about in all of infrastructure as a service, software as a service, that $1 trillion spend shift is what's driving this. People are accessing systems directly. They're no longer backhaul, or they don't want to backhaul either through VPN or MPLS. It's either cost or usability. So they're directly connecting. We used to have, at least I did when I put in VPNs, no split tunneling, right? It was either on or it was off. Don't split tunnel. And you get forced. You get the VPs, the CEOs, whoever it is, screaming about the performance, and you start split tunneling. So they can go to Facebook while they're still connected to your back-end systems. If you know what you want to look for, it's nice and easy, right? It's not the one-armed man. It is him. But you got a picture. You've got an ID. This is signature-based. This is what we have traditionally done. We've gone after things from what we know. But what we're looking for today is something that we don't know. People have said it's a needle in a haystack. It's not. It's a needle in a stack of needles that's sharpened on the other end. That's what we're looking for. Because this stuff looks like good code. It smells like good code. It acts like good code. And then it owns you when it gets in. We've got a complete and utter failure of antivirus. We've heard this. Now, I'm going to be very clear on this. When they say antivirus is dead, I'm not saying take antivirus off anything. Keep antivirus on. It is a good end catch-all, whatever you want. Go for free or freemium. I think half the top 10 vendors are giving away product now. When they say it's dead, it's from a business perspective, right? They're not going to make money on it. And you can see this is a typical client of ours. We pulled this out of 1 billion transactions that they did. They're about a 5,000 user company. And you can see the virus is, well, you can't see it. Lasers never work. Less than 1%, 0.95%. In general, across all of the transactions we see with all of our customers, we see about a 1 to 3% antivirus hit, and we've got 6 antivirus engines running. We've got Gartner claiming 60% of the top 100 sites are infected, not through any fault of their own per se. It's really coming through the advertising. We're seeing the bad guys are now buying legitimate ad space because it's a good way in. Invest a little bit in your campaign, you can get a better return. 40% of all traffic today crossing the internet is going across a CDN. Corporate will look at costs, and that is one of the first things they do. They whitelist the CDNs. It's easy, right? It's simple. And nobody's looking at SSL right now. There's just too few companies looking at SSL. Because when you take all that into consideration, if you were to inspect everything, SSL, all CDNs, all your traffic in and out, you're looking at about an 8 times uplift in your infrastructure costs. And that's what's driving it. They're keeping the costs down. We've seen things like iSpy coming in. This is malware as a service. I think that's actually a screenshot from their website. It's kind of brilliant. But this is what we're seeing. We're seeing that this is the bar for this is low. You need no skill whatsoever to get into the malware game. Our CTO, who he doesn't think of himself as the most technical, hands-on coder guy anymore because he's been out of it for a little bit. He went on, bought a piece of cryptoware for $50, compiled it, sent it through, passed through every signature-based tool there was, right? $50, that's all it cost them. Everybody remember Pokemon Go, the fun game? Everybody remember DroidJack that came with it, right? This was released in July 6th, so when people wanted it, they went outside the Google store, they went to the third-party stores, and they were pulling down DroidJack. And I think everybody remembers the story where the original code that was written gave full access to your Google account. Full access. And if you look at the definition from Google of what full access is, that's read emails, delete emails, write emails. The only thing it couldn't do was change your password. But that would have been really handy if, say, your Google account was the email address you used to reset your bank password. I assume that this was just really, really inept, not intentional. They did fix it, right? So you got compromised code, all of it in one. And then we've got the evolution of ransomware. This was a software vendor that wrote a legitimate piece of code, delivered a legitimate piece of digitally signed code, multiple signatures on it, sent it through Mediafire, legitimate way to get your code, had CryptoWall buried inside it. So they're getting very creative as to how they get malware into the environment as well. So what we're talking about now, I'm going to drag up the old defense in depth, right? And we have beaten this term to death. And the thing about it is I'm going to keep on it because it is a valid model. The problem is we've shifted away from what the model meant to what we think the model is. We think the model is buy one of everything, best of breed, slam them all into a data center somewhere, apply everything, and hope they all work together. And it's not. Defense in depth is simply, you don't have to have the best in breed, you don't have to have the most. You have to have compensating controls for when something fails. If a vendor ever gets up and tells you they've got the silver bullet or this, we'll answer all of your problems, run like hell, right? All of the stuff will break. Zscaler stuff will break. It will happen. That's part of reality. It's part of life, right? The key is in understanding how you deal with it and what defense in depth compensating controls you put on top of it to catch it afterwards. So I'll do a quick thing on behavioral analysis. I'm sure everybody's familiar with BA. Cool. Behavioral analysis is simply filling the gap between static analysis that we currently have and what we're seeing in the shift in threats. The behavioral analysis is slow, it's very expensive, and it is not a silver bullet. Let me get those ones out of the way right up front. But it is a necessary piece that's needed in that defense in depth procedure, in that defense in depth concept to catch the things. Because as I said, recompiling code is easy. You bypass the signature base very quickly. Signatures are getting updated. You can update them as fast as you want. They will always continue to get ahead of us, right? So we've fallen into this gap. You need a place where you can run code, give it the time to run, let it reach out and pull down everything it needs to pull down, let it do everything it needs to do, and then make a rational decision on it, whether it's live, VMs or it's a third party, whatever it is, that's the added piece you have to put on top. Antivirus, static, fast, quick, you're going to catch a volume of stuff. Behavioral analysis, slow, expensive, you're going to catch the bigger threats. If you look at actually, do we need it? I'm not going to tell you to go buy it. I mean, the sales guys hate me when I do this, but I'm not going to go tell you to buy behavioral analysis. I'm going to tell you to look at your business from a risk perspective and ask yourself, where is your risk? What is your appetite for risk? And how do you want to address the risk that you have in your business? Because if you're looking at volume, blacklisting, whitelisting, all of the other pieces that we put in place, signatures, IDS, that's all going to catch the volume. You're going to catch the majority of stuff with those. It's the long tail that behavioral analysis get, right? And that's from a security perspective. But if you look at this from a risk perspective, right, that graph is 100% inverted. Because what you're catching with the static stuff is low level, easy, simple, right? And if you don't mind waiting period, you'll catch it. So you can even get, cryptoware or some of the more advanced pieces of malware that are out there in the signature-based stuff, but you have to wait until they get caught. Somebody has to see them. The signature has to be put, and then you have to hit the same piece. That's why we say it's completely inverted. The questions you need to ask yourself when you're doing this is, what platforms, what devices am I protecting? What have I got in my environment? Or am I going to look at SSL, right? Because SSL is going to be a massive cost to your infrastructure. And I think the guys, they'll make the slides available afterwards. And if they won't, hit me up. I can make them available for you. I'll leave you with three things. One, if you think about it, you've got your office users, a traditional environment. We've nailed this one down. Location-based, IDS, IPS, all of the good stuff. Pick up that laptop, walk out to a coffee shop. You're down to antivirus and a local firewall. And if you're on mobile, you've got nothing. iOS doesn't allow the antivirus on it. And if you've ever put antivirus on Android, it grinds it to a halt. So with that, I will say thank you. If you need, hit me up offline for questions. I think we got time for 1 or 2 questions. No questions. Nope. No time. All right. Anyways, guys, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.